Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. As a British person living in Brazil, I'm often asked for my views on the differences between CX in Europe and South America. And this is very similar to the questions often asked of my guest today, Loren Moss. Loren is a publisher and analyst with Unido Digital based in Medellín, Colombia. Although he's originally from the USA and he's a graduate of the Ohio State University. Loren is a well-known CX analyst and commentator, and we recently had a conversation online about the connection between CX channels and demographic groups and whether the channels chosen are dictated by people's age. So I asked him onto the podcast to talk more about this topic in detail. Okay, let's go straight to the interview with Loren now. Okay, so do you think that the changing way that customers insist on multi-channel customer service is reflecting the way that people are now communicating? I mean, after all, there's a lot of people, like myself included, that hardly ever make any actual phone calls with their phone today.
You know, Mark, it's fascinating. If you look at, I'm 50 years old, but still, if my phone rings, I'm kind of surprised because of all the apps on. I have an older model iPhone, but of everything I do with it, probably voice calling is the least frequent. Here in Colombia, the local pharmacy, you order via WhatsApp. So you send them a WhatsApp with what you need, and then they show up at your door a few minutes later. We have Rappi here in Latin America, and then there are, of course, companies in the U.S. now. It's funny because in the U.S., except for maybe the New York area and except for pizzas, you didn't have home delivery. But now, all of a sudden, it's funny how you come full cycle. Back in the 50s and 60s, the milkman came by your house and delivered the milk. But now we've come full circle back to home delivery. And so I think that now, with apps and being able to order things with apps and being able to order, if I want a taxi, of course, everybody knows about Uber, but even the taxis here, you order via an app. And if you want to communicate with the taxi, there's a button and you select from one of several preset messages. And I think that while it is generational, I don't think that my mother is ever going to use an app. She's intellectually capable of it, but she's been doing things via phone for her whole life, and so I do think that you have a generational thing. But I don't think it's limited to millennials or Generation Y or whatever. I think that that it really depends on if you grew up using technology or grew up using a computer. Here, and I think that Brazil is probably the same way, but here in Colombia, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with the bank manager, and we talked about the long line at the bank, and she said that most of the people were in line because they wanted to be. Either they're a retiree and it gets them out of the house, or they want to leave the bank with a little piece of paper. And just don't want to trust using an app or going to pay online, even though all that technology is certainly available here in Latin America and then certainly in Europe and the U.S. So I think that yes, I think that the way that people interact with companies has forever changed and will continue to evolve.
Mm-hmm. But that means that you're still talking about it as generational. It's just that we're not talking about millennials as the kind of defining generation. So maybe Generation X, which is where I guess we're positioned, we did grow up with computers, even though, we can still remember before email being common, but we grew up with, microcomputers. There were computers around in the household. So I guess... are we still talking about that older generation, like the baby boomers, that find it difficult to adopt this kind of WhatsApp culture?
I think that it has to do with. I think that it's like you said, we grew up with computers. You and I think we're roughly the same age. But it's interesting because you live in Brazil and are from Great Britain. I live in Colombia and I'm from the U.S. And I think that what happens is that even in our home countries and then down here, we're old enough to where you and I might have used computers as kids, but we probably had other peers that didn't. I think that by the time I was 18 and I was able to be a customer of a bank, ATMs had become ubiquitous. But down here, it took longer, and so you still have people even our age who just never got used to using technology in that way. They didn't use it at work. You had the traditional. My father knew how to type. But most people in his generation, if they were any kind of professional, they had a secretary, and they would read a letter to them. Me, I can type faster than I can talk, so it wouldn't make any sense for me to ask someone to dictate a letter for me, right? And so I think that it has to do with not just generation, but I think it has a lot to do with where we grew up and who our peers were. If we grew up in maybe a poorer, lower resource neighborhood, in Great Britain or in the United States or in Canada, where the schools didn't have computers. Our schools had a few computers. There wasn't a computer for every kid, but those of us that wanted to go take the computer class, we could. But the generation before didn't have anything like that. And so I think that yes, it's generational, but then I also think that it's regional. There are still vast places here in Colombia and in Brazil, rural areas where you don't necessarily have broadband connectivity. Now 5G is rolling out. That's going to change that. But I think that our relationships with customers, I've been an Amazon customer since 1998. They're fond of reminding me whenever I need something. And I don't even think I was an early adopter. But at the time, that was not the normal thing. Most people still went into the bookstore. You posted something just yesterday about a record store that went out of business. Even though I still have my old vinyl collection from the 1980s and 1990s, I haven't bought a physical. I remember my first CD I bought was in the early 1990s, and I haven't bought one probably in at least 10 years. Actually, longer than that. And so I think that that relationship is changing, but it's more than generational. It has to do with where we are and where we grew up. I think that we have to, and as people that provide customer service, they have to think about their audience and not just how old the audience is, but where that audience is and what they're used to. Rural versus urban, just as much as country versus country or market versus market. It's very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned HMV there, the British brand that just went bust. And I think that maybe there you can see a generational difference because, that's a company that primarily sold CDs and DVDs. And then there's people of my generation and older that will have fond memories of spending time going there to buy records and, and to buy movies. And we're thinking about all those memories as we see the company go bust. There's probably many younger people who have never interacted with a record store brand in that way, that don't have any kind of memories like that at all.
I remember across from Ohio State University, where I went to college, there was a record store. It may still be there, called Used Kids Records, and they had these vintage records, and all the DJs and aficionados would go in there, and it was that experience, like you said, of flipping through the bins and looking at records. A friend of mine who's our age just sent me. My dad was in the record business. Actually, it's how he met my mom back in the 60s, and it's interesting because he actually found an old album where my dad was on the cover and sepia toned and took a picture and sent it to me just the other day. And now you don't have that same experience. On the other hand, I remember back when I was in high school, and I liked dance music, and you couldn't hear it on the radio, and I was too young to go into a nightclub, which was the main venue for dance music. And so it was difficult. It was almost like a secret treasure hunt to try to find the kind of music that we liked, because there was no venue. If you were kids, there was no radio station in Columbus, Ohio that played dance music or even hip hop or anything like that back in the 80s. And so now when you have things like Spotify and you have things like Amazon Prime and you have things like iTunes, and then you have things, these artificial DIFM and Shazam, and they'll look at the music that you like and go out there and Pandora and say, if you like this, you'll probably like that, and use things like AI and machine learning. And it's funny because I've heard songs from Bangladesh or the Philippines that I would have never ever come across. And so yeah, you do lose something when you have that old experience of the record store or going into a Borders bookstore, Barnes and Nobles, and getting coffee and browsing through there and coming across a find. and you do lose something. But then on the other hand, Amazon just recommended a book to me. They kept recommending Principles by Ray Dalio, and I said, who's this guy and why? And I had no idea. And so finally, I just gave in. I said, okay, if I don't like it, I can return it. I had never heard of it or what it was about, and they were right, because by using their own algorithms, they knew I would like that book, and I loved it. Okay, and maybe even and so things. It's not a better or worse, but it's things change, and I think that now with chat and the way that we interact with different things, it's interesting because for customer service, let's say technical support, you might be chatting with somebody, and that support agent can have 4 or 5 different chat windows open at the same time. Versus when you're taking a phone call, you can only really talk to one person at a time. And on the other end, I prefer chat because I can sit here at my computer and I'm chatting and I'm getting customer support, but I'm not sitting here where I can sit here and have a conversation with somebody. I can sit here and multitask and do other things and keep that chat window open and see when that person's responding. Or like I said, when I order medicine, I mean, Spanish isn't my first language, but I live down here and I can type out the prescription and I can get it right versus somebody trying to understand my gringo accent or something like that. So I think that there's a nostalgia and there's a sentimentalism, but I think that things are overall getting better. Mm-hmm. And companies that take advantage of these platforms are able to deliver a superior customer service than they could. I've never had to call Amazon in 20 years. Okay, but I'm satisfied with the customer service I get from them. Yeah. Or the pharmacy, I don't have to talk to anybody anymore, but my medicines show up within 2 hours of me sending a WhatsApp message. And the other thing that's curious is that it's interesting because, like I said, geographically, WhatsApp is big in Brazil and in Colombia. It's funny, WhatsApp is in the U.S., it's a U.S. company, but it's not as big. It doesn't have the market penetration. There are other tools. My brother uses Voxer. Up in the U.S. for whatever reason, or people have SMS is free, where down here in Latin America they charge for it. So I think that these are other factors, and I think it complicates things. But if companies can look at how they deliver their service across channels and meet the customer where the customers are, those companies are going to succeed.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because you mentioned there that you've got great customer service from Amazon, but you've never talked to them for 20 years. So this is something that's interesting because if you talk to the companies, the service providers that provide contact center services to other brands, a lot of them say that the majority of the customer interaction is still phone calls, so voice calls. And do you think that this is because when somebody has a problem with a product and they want it fixed immediately, they want to get somebody on the phone immediately to try and fix that? Or do you think that there's just some other change in the way that people are communicating?
This is why omnichannel is so important, because it really depends on the customer, and it goes beyond age, it goes beyond geography. You can have two people of the same age, of the same background, and it's just like you look at those personality tests where they say this person is amiable and this person is analytical and this person is dominant or introvert or extrovert. An extrovert person or an amiable person might feed. My dad was a people person. He fed off of interaction with people. Then on the other hand, you have people who my brother is a computer programmer and so he's an introverted person, and you have some people that would rather not pick up the phone, but then some people who love it and they don't want to deal with a company where they can't pick up a phone and talk to somebody. So I think it's interesting. I look at different customers and clients that we engage in, and some people want to have a touchy-feely conversation and want to have all that interaction. It's when video conferencing, when things like WebEx came out, especially right after 9/11, everybody said that, oh, well, it's going to kill travel, it's going to kill conferences, it's going to kill face-to-face meetings. No, because the majority of communication is nonverbal. Okay, the last time I saw you, we were presenters at a conference. Okay, and the thing is that that's not going to go away, and we see that there's that industry is thriving because where everything has a place. So there's certain people, there's certain customers that even though we can talk or we can chat or we can email, I'm going to go and fly and see them 2 or 3 times a year, right? And so I think that there's other people, there's customers who say, look, we're fine, I'm busy, you're doing your job, send me a report, and I'm happy with you. I don't want to waste time with you on the phone. And they say that. You look at securities. You look at some people want to go into a stockbroker's office and see the mahogany panels and get that feeling or have the tea served or whatever. and need that face-to-face communication where other people are going to go online and go to Charles Schwab or somebody like that and open up an account. And even if they're not a trader, even if they're not going to do it themselves, they'll interact with somebody via chat or via perhaps phone if they have a question. But it's a personal thing, and so I think that's why omnichannel is so important, because you can't. It's an oversimplification to segment it and to say, okay, we're going to serve Generation X like this, and then millennials like that, or Generation Z. No, because you're going to have people who are 20 years old who want to pick up the phone or have a conversation or meet in person, and you're going to have people who are 80 years old who want to chat or use WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so beyond just the communication channels that we've been talking about, what are you working on at the moment, or what kind of trends are you looking out for in 2019? What are the big things, in your opinion, that we should be watching out for in CX?
One of the things I think is that artificial intelligence and machine learning is finally getting there. I remember back in the 90s when AT&T was an early adopter. I was still in the States and I had AT&T, and they had tried to use kind of it wasn't really artificial intelligence, but I remember interacting with their IVR system, and the system tried its best to keep you from talking to an agent and trying to solve your problem if it was a common problem. And so it would just say, I didn't get that. Can you repeat that? Or I didn't get, or I mean, it really wasn't ready for prime time yet. And it made my blood boil, right? And as soon as I heard that I was talking to some kind of non-human, I felt disrespected, like this company doesn't value me enough to give me a human. Now, I think part of that might be generational, but not generational because I'm an old fogey, but because I remember when it just didn't work. Okay, and now it's really getting to the point to where it is able to work, and it's able to work very effectively. They have these contests where they put people. They have people interact with an artificial intelligence bot or agent, and you have to decide if you're talking to a real person or if you're talking to an artificial intelligence bot. And they've got it up to 30% of the people cannot tell. Mm-hmm. And even people that are technically proficient and know something about the industry can't tell yet. So I think that is really changing, and it's going to change how customer experience is delivered. Now you're going to see technology providers replace traditional contact centers or contact center employees, and those contact centers that survive are either going to become technology providers, or they're going to move very high up in the value chain, and where you need, for example, a registered nurse on a support line, and so or you need somebody that's providing third or fourth level technical support, where there is some kind of engineer or technician, not just the kind of off the street call center agent that has language skills, but you're going to see higher level professionals. The bottom of the first line and second line customer support agents, I think we're finally at the point to where we're going to see those jobs go away. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is the year when that's going to start happening. I don't see RPA, that's the big buzzword. I don't really see that having effect. More on the BPO side, not so much on customer experience, but I really think that AI and machine learning is to the point now where it will not be a cutting edge thing, but we're going to see it deployed in the mainstream. I think this is the year when we're really going to see a big difference and see those things taking root. And we're going to get used to, and I think that the younger generations are used to interacting with machines. And it's a normal thing. Alexa and Siri and all of these things like that. My daughter has grown up basically. I mean, not for 16 years, but for the last 5 or 6 years with Alexa. It's not an exotic thing. It's not a new thing to them, and so they're going to be used to asking a phone or a speaker device or a machine and interacting with the machine via voice and getting those answers. And machine learning to be able to go and dig into a knowledge base and find the information that you're probably looking for and being able to use natural language processing. This year, we talked about it a lot in 2017 and 2018. I think this is the year we really see it rolling out in the mainstream and becoming the default or the commonplace.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.